This lecture deals with some of the issues that lead us eventually to the American Revolution. So the first slide here demonstrates that the British troop deployment is going to change between 1763, when the French and Indian War is going on, where the majority of them are in Canada, where it moves to other places in 1772, major cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, and then it centers around Boston on the eve of the American Revolution in 1775, which will be because we have Lexington and Concord, the battles, the Boston Tea Party, Boston Massacre. Those events lead Boston to be one of the centers of the American Revolution at the beginning. So in 1775, after Paul Revere's ride, where he lets everybody know the British are coming, the British are searching for stolen weapons in a town called Lexington. There was a small colonial militia called Minutemen, because they had the reputation for being ready at a minute notice, attacks this larger group of English soldiers. They stopped at Lexington and encountered 56 Minutemen, the British did, and it is kind of just a little skirmish. It's not a significant battle in casualties or in anybody winning or losing. It's just showing the British colonists actually stepping up to the British government. So the battle begins as a British captain tells the colonists to basically move out of the way. We don't exactly know who fires the first shot, whether it was the British or the Americans, but 8 Americans are eventually killed in the Battle of Lexington. After Lexington, they move on to Concord, which is where they thought the stolen weapons were. When they got there, they see a larger contingent of Minutemen, and the Minutemen will inflict numerous casualties on the Redcoats. And the fact that the group of colonists, colonial farmers, could repel an army of the world's largest empire was monumental. This is kind of that shot heard around the world that really starts the American Revolution at these 2 battles, Lexington and Concord. So again, the significance of this battle, or of these battles, are not big casualties or whether the British find lots of weapons. It's the fact that the Americans are willing to literally fight their government, their army, because of all the ideas previously stated with no taxation without representation, all the different acts we discussed. They are willing to stand up to a authority, which we talked about with the Great Awakening and with the Enlightenment, that they are prepared to do that now, and it does lead to bloodshed. So after the battle, we decide in 1775 to have the Second Continental Congress. We talked about the First Continental Congress, known as the Stamp Act Congress, earlier on, and we send an olive branch petition. We draft an olive branch petition in Philadelphia and say that we want to stay part of the empire, but England must redress our grievances, which means they must kind of be talk with us about what we need, the representation in Parliament, etc. And Congress does prepare for war at the same time. So again, this document, we declare that we want to stay British, we want to negotiate with King George, but they have problems with the Congress, the Parliament, and how they were acting, and they instructed the local militias in each town to begin preparing for war with the Minutemen. So they're doing both things. They're hoping that they can negotiate after the first battles with Lexington and Concord, but while they're doing that, they're also preparing for war. They're doing this because they realize King George is probably not going to accept this olive branch petition, and hopefully, if he doesn't, we can be preparing for war, to be prepared when a bigger, larger war breaks out. So we have to figure out who's going to be the first general, and the 2 main candidates were Washington and Hancock, and the Congress bases their decision on a couple of issues: the political, how political these people were, economic impacts of choosing a person, military experience, and then how society views them. So George Washington becomes the general based on that, and John Hancock becomes the president of the Second Continental Congress. So they each get leadership roles. Washington, you could argue, got the more prominent one of actually being the commander-in-chief during the American Revolution. So as we said, the army is made up of volunteers and militia. Washington is chosen as commander-in-chief. It is not an army of professionals, but of farmers. So they lack discipline, as the British saw in the French and Indian War. We don't have resources. The men were not paid, and some quit after the first few battles because they weren't really prepared for war. The Second Continental Congress does not have any money to supply an army, so Washington's job is really one of his main jobs is to try to keep this army together during the war. And that's one of his major difficulties, trying to get money and supplies from the Continental Congress. So before we actually declare independence in July of 1776, Thomas Paine comes out with what he calls common sense, that it is obvious that we should declare independence from Great Britain. And he does this in January of 76 after the battles of Lexington and Concord. And he's actually relatively new to America. He comes in 1774 from England, and he gets involved in this revolutionary spirit. So the Common Sense is actually a 50-page pamphlet that tried to convince many that King George was a tyrant and that declaring independence from Great Britain was our only choice. And again, this is done before the Declaration of Independence is actually written and then obviously voted upon. So Paine goes further than just asking for independence. He says that we should also create a democratic republic, that power should be derived from popular consent, from the people. And Thomas Jefferson is going to include that in his Declaration of Independence. The colonists' experience in self-government prepared them for the creation of a republic. Also, the absence of hereditary aristocracy, like in England and most of Europe, and equality among land-owning farmers contributed to the idea of the republic. So they believed, or he believed, that civic virtue was vital to Republican form. No king, then individuals must sacrifice for the public good. Some wanted a natural talent aristocracy, instead to keep power from the lower orders, from more common people, more similar to what it was in England. Thomas Paine says this is an opportunity to be dissimilar from England and make a republican type of government where people were based on their merit, not on kind of where they grew up or their God-given talents. So the Second Continental Congress will act as our government during the war, and it eventually become the government under the Articles of Confederation after the American Revolution. So they come together to write the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson is the primary author, but Ben Franklin, John Adams, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston also assist in its creation. The 56 signers are sacrificing their life. When they sign this declaration, they are putting their name to a document that is treason. Their fortunes are going to be lost, some of them because of this, and the king will charge these men with treason, so he's going to look to go after them. So once they sign the declaration, as you see in this image, it wasn't this big momentous occasion to sign it. They had to kind of sign and run out of Philadelphia because the British military knew that they were meeting there. The big idea, according to John Adams, was actually July 2nd when they voted upon it and confirmed it. They sign it on July 4th, but it's a quick thing, and then they leave. So this is an image really should be about the voting of the Declaration, not the signing of it. So Thomas Jefferson represents kind of the old school English aristocracy. He's a plantation owner. He's very wealthy, but he was different because he was a Renaissance man. He was very interested in a lot of different things and very good at a lot of different things. He owned slaves. He was a representative to the Second Continental Congress, and he's considered kind of the father of the Declaration. He's kind of the idea man behind the American Revolution. So the main pieces of the Declaration were, first of all, we have to explain to the world why separating from England was necessary. And that whole idea is we have to be seen as legitimate. We're not just separating because we're mad about taxes. It's bigger than that. It proposes a new theory of government where democracy, the people rule. It's a list of grievances against King George and Parliament, and it's also a declaration of war. And the colonies become the United States of America as we declare independence. So we're no longer colonists, we are now American citizens. So part of the list of grievances is the colonists thought that they possessed the English Bill of Rights that King George had violated, like trial by jury, due process, private property, no cruel punishment, excessive bails or fines, right to bear arms, right to petition. And these are eventually all included in the Declaration in the Bill of Rights, the American Bill of Rights, after we signed the Constitution. But these were some of the major issues we felt that we had with King George and Parliament. So Thomas Jefferson writes this declaration. It enumerates the colony's grievances. It lists them. It articulates the principle of liberty and what the government is supposed to do. But it is flawed. Thomas Jefferson really is only talking about white property-owning men. He actually did include a clause called the omitted paragraph that actually would have probably ended slavery from day one in the United States, but it is voted down by colonies like South Carolina that didn't want to get rid of their slaves, so they kind of pushed slavery off to the future, obviously with the Civil War, among other things. So this slide just kind of goes over the Declaration totally. The 56 signers of treason. The document is illegal according to King George. It is officially approved on July 4th, and August 2nd is the day it is signed. Thomas Jefferson is the father. The goal is to generate support for the American cause. It is a piece of propaganda. And the audiences were loyalists or Americans who weren't that interested in the American Revolution. The British people, letting them know why we're leaving. The king listing grievances against him in Parliament and in other European countries to make us seem legitimate. It's a statement of intent, why we're trying to get rid of this, and then we're coming up with this new theory of government, the social contract theory, which was basically a theory by John Locke and Rousseau that the government's power comes from its people. People give up some rights to have their other rights protected, natural rights specifically. The purpose of government was to preserve the people, the liberty and property, the government of laws, not by a man, so that no man is above the law, and that men by nature are all free, equal, and independent, so the government has to treat them equally. And obviously this shows how the Declaration kind of goes along with John Locke's ideas. The idea of all men are created equal, you could argue Thomas Jefferson did actually mean all men, including African-American men, because he does include, he attempted to include a paragraph that talks about the horrors of slavery. However, that is omitted, so it really just means all white property-owning men are created equal, at least at its inception. And just to clarify, so this social contract theory really comes from Locke. He's a philosopher during the 1680s, writes several books, and he really influences Jefferson with the idea that power comes from the people, that government is supposed to do common good for most people, and that it does not reflect the will of the people can change it. That's where he gets that whole idea of alter or abolish the government if it doesn't protect your natural rights. So as we actually get into the war, you can see that it was not really evenly divided, or it's pretty evenly divided here. The Patriots were the people who supported the war, loyalists were people who wanted to stay with England, and people who were neutral were generally out in the western part of the country. But it's pretty evenly divided, almost in thirds, that so it's not all Americans were into this thing. And you can see where the different strongholds are. The Patriots are in Virginia, in Boston, in Pennsylvania, especially in Philadelphia, but you can see the loyalists are in major cities as well, because that's where a lot of the money was. They felt that they were making money as is. They didn't need to change things up. Whereas you can see the tan is out in the West, where the Indians and loyalists or neutral people were, where they didn't really care, or they were loyal to England because things were fine the way they were. So as we get into the war militarily, the British have a significantly larger population. Their manufacturing is highly developed compared to ours, which is practically non-existent. They are the richest country on earth, and we have no money. Their army was large, well-trained, and plus they will hire Hessians, which were mercenaries, to come fight for them. Ours are volunteers, poorly equipped and poorly trained. Their leaders weren't as good, where we have kind of officers that are better, so you start to see a little bit of an advantage there. The other advantage we have is they are kind of not on home turf, so they had difficulty resupplying troops from England, and we knew the land. Their navy, it's the best in the world. We have none. They were willing to fight because the soldiers were told to. We were defending our homeland. We knew if we didn't win, we were going to be killed, mostly for fighting. So we had a better reason to fight. Our goal was to fight a war of attrition. Basically means we were going to try to just keep fighting until the British went away. Their goal was to break us in half between South and North, and we wouldn't work well. Their military strategy was to block the ports and use their strength in numbers. Our were guerrilla tactics. Fight an insurgent war. Don't have to win the battles, just wear them down. And eventually we wanted to make an alliance with one of Britain's biggest enemies, which would be the French, and theirs was to use the loyalists against us. We are going to be far more successful than they will, obviously, which is why we win the war. And why we win the war generally will become our alliance with France after the Battle of Saratoga. We will control the British will control the cities, but not the countryside, where a large population will live. The generals will make key mistakes because they kind of thought we were not they didn't take us seriously, really. They had a lack of communication because they had such large supply lines, and finally we were fighting for a cause where they were fighting really because they were told to.